Hi, welcome to Culture Sharp. So this week I've been all about non-cooperation. Not that I haven't been cooperating, but that I've been thinking about the impact of non-cooperation. I've been studying it a little bit and trying to just get my head around the impact that it has inside organizations. On a macro scale, it's really easy to understand this. I mean, if you look at this picture here, this is Reagan and Gorbachev in 1986 in Reykjavik. And this was the first time these two leaders had actually met. They got together to discuss nuclear, some sort of a nuclear treaty anyway. It all fell apart over the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars program that the Americans claimed they had and the Soviets were terrified of. And the Americans refused to give it up. The Soviets refused to negotiate without it, and so it all fell apart. And while they're all smiling here, the actual leaving scene at the end of this summit was of them looking pretty depressed and pretty down. One assumes they really wanted a treaty, perhaps because they really wanted to be seen as peacemakers, perhaps simply because they knew it would be crazy to have nuclear weapons and they wanted to get rid of them. That'd be a nice thought. But here was the thing: they were back in 1987 to go and have a word again. And in fact, this was one of many summits that had taken place. Nikita Khrushchev and John F. Kennedy had met in Vienna in '61, and Reagan and Brezhnev had met. I mean, there've been lots of opportunities for these guys to get together and talk this through. Partly because one assumes they understood that they simply didn't have the right, and this is important, they didn't have the right not to try and get along. The entire world was depending on them not screwing this up, right? Not creating a big nuclear war which would engulf us all. And so we were really depending on them to just get their acts together and get on the same page. And they seemed to understand that. They understood certainly the importance of that. But this goes beyond the threat of nuclear war. This is all about, if they could just have cooperated more, if they had got over themselves and got themselves together much earlier, decades earlier, think about the amount of waste that would have been avoided, waste of resources, waste of time, all the fear-mongering, all of that kind of thing. In fact, if it hadn't been for the arms race and the power struggle and the ideological struggle between these two, we may not have had quite the same negative impact we've had on third world and developing countries. There could have been all sorts of things might have been different if it hadn't been for the stupidity of non-cooperation. So I think this whole notion, this is what sits with me, and this is the big thing, this big lesson, and I'll repeat it, that you do not have the right not to get along. So I've been working with leadership teams, with ExCo teams, working with them to try and develop them into cohesive teams where they really work together as a team, where they develop one another as leaders and have each other's backs and work to develop a strong cohesive strategy and culture for the organization. I think what happens typically is that doesn't happen. People end up viewing themselves as sitting on top of a silo rather than seeing themselves as part of this significant sort of important team within an organization. And that leads itself to competitive interests. At the end of the day, if I see myself predominantly as the head of IT or the head of HR or the head of sales, then, and secondary as a leader of the organization, then I'm protecting my own backyard. And when you try and step in and help, I see that as a threat. And there's a challenge. Everybody suffers when that goes on. All we end up with is waste of resources, waste of time, waste of opportunity. It doesn't make any sense. So I think this is something that we don't drill home into our organizations nearly hard enough. I don't think you have the right not to get along. I don't think it's an option. I don't think it's a choice. If you're having a problem with a colleague, especially at a leadership level or a management level or a supervisory level, but it doesn't matter where. If you're having a problem with a colleague, it is your job to try and resolve that. And if you can't resolve it, it's your job to try and escalate it. You need to do something about it, not just sit there and shrug your shoulders and go, hey ho, this is just somebody that I have to try and manage. Because that's insanity. All that is a recipe for more stress, more tension, more difficulty. It was a recipe for people to not get along. And when we don't get along, we end up with lost resources, lost time, lost opportunities. We may not end up with a nuclear war, but that doesn't mean we can't end up with something incredibly damaging. This is, I guess, is the big lesson for this week, and it's one that's been sitting on my mind in particular. And it really came about, I mean, this is something that I've been thinking about for a while, ever since I discovered this picture. And it's amazing how a picture can spark a whole series of thoughts. And I presented this a number of times in workshops and in presentations. I put this picture up and I've kind of had this conversation. But it's really been something that I've been thinking about more deeply over the last week or so, simply because of the work I've been doing with leadership teams. And so it's something that I wanted to bring to you. It's food for thought for me. In fact, it's eating through my brain at the moment. I hope it's food for thought for you as well. And I wish you a very pleasant week of intense cooperation. Have a great week.